When did your interest in neuroscience begin?
When I was a boy, I really wanted to be a poet. I really wanted to create poetry, and that was so beautiful. But then I read big authors, and I realized, oh my God, everything is already written. I can't produce anything more beautiful than that. And then I decided I want to be a computer scientist. And indeed, I started studying that, and then I realized that actually, AI is the most fascinating thing of all we developed for computers. And then I realized, oh my God, it's all inspired by the brain organization and the brain biology of the human brain. And then I decided I must implement everything I learned in the domain of AI to better understand natural intelligence. And that idea struck me around 15 years ago. And since then, I am relentlessly digging deeper and deeper into that modality of intersection of artificial and natural intelligence.
How do you see that intersection translating into sport?
Sports is a unique environment where human beings challenge themselves, challenge nature, push the boundaries. And lately, I would say in the last 20 to 30 years, their cognitive frontiers became the most important for success in sports, according to data. Because even Olympic records are stagnating. 100 meter, 200 meter, they can't beat the world records anymore because it seems that physically we're so close to the limits of the human body. And this is why in sports, especially in team sports and competitive sports, their cognitive aspects become so dominant for the final result. And this is why we decided to transition from the lab environments and academic research environments to their real world scenarios, as we call from academy, as if we don't live in the real world there. Uh, Where else should you test and validate human augmentation technologies if not in competitive sports, which is actually built to push the boundaries?
I think when we talk about applied neuroscience, sport is a perfect kind of canvas to look through the lens of neuroscience at. When you're looking at a soccer player, what kind of data points are you seeking?
This is an excellent question because there is so much interest in professional sports, and still understanding uh, is in early stages, and the science of applied sports neuroscience is in the infancy. So, what type of data points is even available that could describe cognitive behavior, brain dynamics in competitive athletes? So, first of all, um, cognitive tests. They're readily available in sports, and you can measure reaction time, you can measure sustained attention, you can measure to some extent impulse control. But all those tests are designed for non-sports settings. So in sports, under fatigue and pressure of the game, the measurement might be not one-to-one or not even transferable. Another modality that is being brought to life recently is modality of actually brain signal measurement. So you can measure brain um, dynamics using specialized brain sensors and track its progression over time. The same way, if you go to the gym and you exercise specific muscle groups, you can measure the volume, their contraction, right? Contraction impulses. The same you can measure in the brain domain, because our brain mostly work on electricity. So the more neurons are involved in a specific action, the stronger is the response that you can capture with specific sensors that you can place on the surface of the head. And you can track the dynamics of this muscle growth, brain muscle growth over time.
When we think of elite athletes, we so often think of just the physical performance. How did you decide that in the same way that you can track speed or endurance physically, there was a whole untapped marketplace of data points mentally to tap into?
Definitely. And this is very true. Though, let's speak about the feasibility, what is possible, what is not. There is a reason why brain data points are not widely used at the moment. First, because our mind, our brain is much more complex than any other system of the body. This is why the way it works influences the ability of sports professionals to interpret specific data points. And the first thing we, as academics, we want to ensure that we don't make any harm, right? So we don't mislead any understanding of sports professionals. So you need to start from domains that you really understand. And out of many domains, from the brain neuroscience perspective, you can already better understand field of visualization, field of attention, field of alertness, and some specific sports motor preparation. We call it motor readiness to compete and to perform on the pitch, right? Some professional specialization related to sports. So all that you can measure, you can track, and you can interpret. Many other things, such as decision making, is beyond the scope and the reach of the current neuroscience, because this process involves understanding of their inputs, visual and all sensory inputs, then interpreting that, going back to the memory, understanding them, and then going back to the decision-making areas, more prefrontal cortex, our voluntary choice-making areas of the brain that will help you based on all the collected information and based on all the knowledge make the decision that is the best at this moment. So it's very complex and I would say phenomena. It's not even a process. The beauty of our brain is so outstanding that I can't even explain it in words. This also constitutes the limitation of our understanding in neuroscience. And all clubs immediately ask me, I want to improve decision making of my players because they are all the time making mistakes. And some companies actually do that promises and never could deliver them. And I want to highlight that there is definitely needs to incorporate brain data into the sports science. And there is also responsibility to interpret only reliable data that can yield to actual benefits to sports.
When you have a team approach you and say, my team could potentially benefit from knowing this about themselves. What is the first step to integrating your software into a club?
I think the safest way at the moment is to ask what teams and sports psychologists have been using today, till today. And we know that visualization is widely accepted and used both for peak performance and for game and match day preps and for rehabilitation, return to sports after injuries. And it's been used, but the main question, why it is effective? So people subjectively feel it's effective, but why it is effective? And the trick here is very interesting. Actually, when you visualize action in all details, your brain does exactly the same work as if you're really moving. From the planning perspective, the activity is almost identical. The main difference conceptually is that this plan being prepared hasn't been sent to muscle to be executed. Right? That's the only difference. So you can use visualization to train your brain. And when we think about training in sports in general, I will give you an example in soccer, for instance. When we kick the ball, we have strong foot and weak foot. The same amount of physical conditioning. The only difference is the amount of brain control that we developed with the training to control the ball. And with one foot, we can do whatever we want with the ball. With the other, we barely can pass it. So we actually, most of the time, while training on the pitch, we're actually training the brain. We call it training muscle memory. But obviously, muscle doesn't have any memory. Memory lives in the brain. So you can train with visualization. You can prepare yourself, activate yourself, and even train yourself to execute specific actions on the pitch more effectively. This is why athletes, before the important game, they rehearse mentally specific long balls, technically sophisticated actions that they can and they know how to execute. The only problem, consistency of that execution. So they want to increase chances to execute these actions well, and this is why they rehearse them. The same applies to the return to sports. You can visualize actions to maintain muscle memory, maintain mind-body connection, to ensure higher probability, higher chances of return to performance after being healed from the injury. This is the main underlying factor. And I think we are all in agreement, sports professionals, sports psychologists, athletes themselves, and neuroscientists, we are all in agreement. And this is why we usually start incorporating that data points in their routine. Because now you can not only visualize, but you can visualize with the feedback. So you can quantify how well you visualize, how well you are able, what is your maximum level of activation of visualization, what is your minimum level, how you are compared to other athletes, what is your progression over time. And psychologists or sports professionals can also direct or guide visualization to, some can decide to work on their weak foot performance, for instance, and to have the full program around visualization of actions of the weak foot to build this neuromuscular connection, to control that foot better. Others might want to decide to work on specific key actions relevant for their position, to work on their strength, let's say, right, to perform better. That is initial data point, but then you obviously can progress to track impulse control and to work on that modality of the brain. Then you can progress on sustained attention and increase the duration of attention, sport-specific attention that you can train the same way you're training the muscle strength.
How did you decide that iBrain Health was going to develop a sports video game that would aid in that visualization?
So the decision came from a decade of academic research. During that time, we helped those who are injured after brain injuries, for instance, and can't move, paralyzed. But the only problem is with their brain. It lost ability to plan actions. And they're, because of plasticity of our brain, if you know how to activate specific regions responsible for motor control, you can really facilitate reconnection or restoration of this motor control function. And then movement come back faster than naturally. So this is why when we transitioned to professional sport settings, we were guided by three major principles. Their training should be data-driven, it should be immersive, and it should be action-specific. So if we're speaking about sports, there is no other way to train sports cognitive function if not in the sport-specific environment. It is not possible not to train in cognitive skill relevant for sports in not related settings. So, for instance, if you just play, I don't know, a simple game or play FIFA, right, with your fingers, it kind of also helps you to understand sports better, but it doesn't develop any skills. That is my point. You need to be in the relevant environment, use relevant neuromuscular pathways, and have a way to quantify your effort to convert that into the brain gene. Because without a feedback, you don't know how well you visualize and how well you did your cognitive intervention. So this is why it's indeed, it looks like a video game that you play with your mind, and it is sport specific, but it actually is a brain gym.
When you are working with elite athletes who basically play their sport all the time, including in their dreams, what is the feedback that you've had from trying to create an immersive experience for them?
You know, the higher the professional level of athletes, the easier it is actually to work with them on their professional development side because they do use visualization most of the time, and the ability to make it easier for them and to direct their visualization effort into the domains that are most important for them is usually very helpful. Also, we work with many injured athletes who can't train on the pitch or on the court, and they are very appreciative of for the ability to continue training. And it actually is a training because it's very demanding. Many people sweating. Think about that. They just play game with visualization, sitting on the chair, and they're sweating because it is so hard. We as humans don't know how to take our mind under control, how to direct activity of our mind. It is actually very interesting learning, transformative learning of humans, how to exercise the mind as casually as exercising our body. So this level, what your question was about professional athletes, we have actually good reception from them. And also young athletes love it because it's more gamified. And what? I can play video game with my mind and become better in my sports? I don't need any scientific explanation. Let me try it. I'm better than you. You see, now there is competitive element on that. Sometimes we have lines of children willing to compete on i-Brain, and it's very encouraging. Because speaking about youth and about we support academies, residency programs, boarding schools, we see quite often transition of the skill, of sport-specific skill to their academic performance as well. So once you know how to control your mind better for sports performance, to be more in control, to plan actions better, then you see that you can transfer that skill to academic settings and to behave better during the class or to be more focused longer, like not 2 seconds or 2 minutes maximum that all teachers report. Students can focus in the class, but maybe to increase it to 5, 10 minutes. That helps academically.
What kind of data points are you seeking when an athlete comes into work with you and puts on the cap and starts to play through their visualization exercise? What are you looking for?
We use their sensors called EEG sensors, it's electroencephalogram recordings, and we focus on three major indexes. First, visualization index from left and right motor cortex, because interestingly enough, our right hand and foot being controlled from the left side of the brain and vice versa. So this is number one. Then, because when you visualize actions, as I mentioned earlier, there is a planning of that action. And this every planning of every action has a specific fingerprint of activity, specific signal that you can extract. Second, we track concentration index. This is something that lives in the prefrontal cortex, and this is your ability to direct your action. So not only to execute an action, but also to direct it towards the specific target, specific goal. And the last index we capture is alertness index. This is something that always should be taken into account because in case of severe stress or lack of sleep or some brain health related issues, like underlying ancient areas of the brain, they could become so loud, so loud, so they can suppress all cortical activity of the brain. So all the training, and fine tuning on decision making would not make any sense if you didn't sleep for 2 days, right? That is another index we're tracking just for brain health performance.
How do you see that professional athletes stack up in that alertness modification compared to other athletes or compared to school children, other demographics that you've tested this software on?
It's very interesting. So to answer your question, I need to mention that each of human brains is unique because our brain is not described by the amount of nervous cells, but it is described by the specific connections between neurons that being built with their experience and with the training. So each brain is unique because it's based on your life, right? And everything you did in life. So of course, professional athlete activation of the motor system is so much greater than an amateur sport because there's so much more training. Though, if you put our headset on a professor versus the professional soccer player, for instance, you can mention that professor is so much more in control in their decision making part of that and the aiming part of that modality. Of course, their motor activity is far behind, but they can control their mind relatively better. And all the system is based on the AI principles that adapt to each brain to ensure the challenging level required for learning, required for training. So it has built-in adaptation. First of all, different difficulty level, but also built-in adaptations for each individual brain because it models each individual brain separately. But ballpark athletes are amazing in motor control. Very often, especially young athletes, lack that consistency of aiming and concentration and impulse control. And more senior athletes, we see how they are, like machines, generate the same stable patterns over time. And that, of course, is the pattern of seniority.
What is the most unintended takeaway that you've had since you started this kind of modality?
Wow, what a question. It's very hard to say because we live in a world now where awareness of the brain health and brain development is raising dramatically. We see Elon Musk in the domain with Neuralink. We see Meta doing a lot for neural interfaces in VR for metaverse. We see other companies like Sony more and more active in the domain of neuroscience with their consumer electronics products as well. So definitely the next frontier after AI automates all routine jobs would be what to do with our happiness, with our life satisfaction, with our fulfillment. And I would argue without understanding of the organ where all these items being originated, just impossible. It is simply impossible. Evolution of humanity without opening this black box of our mind is absolutely limited. We can't continue as we were without that. So the most unintended understanding came from that data point that there is actually huge need of people of different ages, regardless their seniority level in sports, to better understand their mind, to better understand their mind. And we see how children react to that training. We see how their teachers react. We see how coaches, their parents, it transforms many elements. For instance, sometimes we show to the coach, this guy he needs help. He has attention span of 2 minutes. And the coach said, "Oh my God, now I understand why he can't like remember my instructions in the halftime break. He never. I thought he's mean with me, right? But I said no. You need to break your instructions in a very short messaging because he can't. He just can't contain them if you explain for 20 minutes. And just understanding could already bring so much value. But imagine if we can help this guy to extend it from 2 to 10 minutes. That can transform his life entirely.
What do you see the future of sport neurotech becoming?
Also, very, very important question. It definitely depends on acceptance and opinion leaders of within institutions of sports. And we know that some leagues are more open than others. If you recall, the NFL for many years confronted their brain health research, let's say, and then they embraced it and opened the doors, and now it is the leading organization for actual health research in sport. So very much depends on the policy on the leagues. There is definitely need. More and more organizations looking into that, both in terms of skill development and like prevention, such as concussion prevention, brain health understanding in general. So I would expect it to grow, but gradually, because still sports is very conservative, relatively conservative domain, and any change is a big change. And in general, change of behavior of people is the most difficult of all. Yes, so that is my understanding of that. This is inevitable. Obviously, brain domain will grow, and we see that adoption of sports psychology, for instance, is increasing. Even a few years ago, it was still not a must-have. Now, more and more clubs, fortunately, embrace that. It is important. And then I think psychology just needs brain science to empower sports psychology with data.
When you have an athlete or a team that has already sort of bought into the sports psychology, talk psychology part of mental wellness and is looking for an edge up like you can provide, how would you pitch your service to them?
Usually there is no need to pitch anything. If they already have psychology on board, then you just share with the psychologist that there is a tool to quantify the impact of their work, and that's it. They say, okay, please let me know how can we implement that. Because if the psychology is already on board, then the visualization is widely used, and there is certainty and clarity around that. In other use cases for return to sports and recovery, usually they go through the medical team, and definitely there is medical validation and review required. And then there is nothing better than personal experience. When people experience that concept and they feel it, they understand how our body and our mind reacts to the brain training, it's easier for them to make a decision. But again, any decision, I don't want to undermine the complexity of decision making. Think about that. Even to install a camera, like VAR, like in their soccer stadiums, in soccer games, took, I don't know, 10, 15 years. Any change in professional sports is difficult. And someone within the organization need to take leadership, take initiative. So that means take a risk. What other people will think about that, what players will think about that. They would need to invest some resources or reorganize the time allocation during the training. It is important step. It is important step, and I'm very fortunate, like thankful to our partners, opinion leaders around the world, bigger sports organizations such as Juventus, Benfica, few MLS clubs, clubs in Germany, in some countries, like even in India, right? That embrace the novelty and change, could understand the potential benefit of that, and could take a lead of innovation in their respected country or league.
So you see, we only have about 3.5 minutes left. So I'm going to wrap it up with this question. How do you see your technology being applicable outside of sport? Not just now, but in 10, 15 years.
I see the future where brain training is as accessible and routine as physical exercise. I see the future where our children play useful games and use their time with joy and with efficiency. I think that sports is essential. We need to exercise our body. We have to stay fit and healthy. And we need to use the screen time much more efficiently. So I see the future where the brain training, cognitive training technology could be fused with playful experience and create a new domain of human activity called useful games that could continuously augment our human performance. This I would like to aspire to. I would also want to highlight that real professional understanding is required in this specific domain because it is so much more sensitive and risky than everything we've been doing before, including AI. Even AI is super important and potentially risky technology because of its power. But playing with our mind is absolutely existential, right? So Elon Musk once said that the CEO of Boeing probably doesn't understand how plane flies. And I would add that we need more and more leaders in this domain who deeply understand the brain dynamics, what is possible, what is not, what is ethical, what is not, to push the evolution of that domain to their sustainable and beneficial future of people.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I am so excited to put this episode together. I think what you're doing is so cool. And I'll reach out in a few weeks once this is published. I hope you love it.